Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and give you your trivia question from last week, which this one, I don't even know. This one's kind of wild. Cameron, do you want to go ahead and give us the question?
Yeah, so I'm still not 100% sure if this is even true because it sounds kind of insane. But a bride in Cyprus holds the current record for the longest wedding veil, which you're supposed to guess roughly how many football fields that was, or if you wanted to go one step further, say it in feet, which is even crazier. I've never seen something so large in my life. But the answer is 63 football fields, or actually technically 63 and a half, which is 23,000 feet. That's like Michigan. I don't know.
I
That's,
don't.
that's, that's a lot.
I have no idea why somebody would want to carry that behind themselves. But I found photos online. It from everything I read and saw, it seems legit, although it's super hard to believe. But yeah, 63 football fields. And her veil was like it would go down one path all the way down to the end, and then it would like have to make a loop and come back the other direction.
Imagine if she didn't even loop and she just had to go in a straight line.
Oh
Like,
my
I don't
gosh.
think you could do that over that much land without like crossing over water or something.
I don't know. Oh, that would be gross. Can you imagine how nasty that veil would have been afterwards, though? Just dragging on the floor. Ugh.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Catch a bunch of bugs and ew. Uh, anyways, if you guys have seen some really crazy like long veils, let us know. But I've never personally seen anything not even close to one football field length of veil. But anyways, hope you enjoyed that, and let's jump into this week's episode. And welcome to Plant a Seed. Hello. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Plant the Seed. You got Nathan, and you got Cameron, and I had a delicious breakfast. It was great. So, Cameron, how are you?
Good. I also had delicious breakfast. It was Lucky Charms. Dude, they slap so hard.
Oh my goodness, gourmet, right there. Oh my, I had eggs and bacon, but if I had some Lucky Charms,
Dude, unpopular opinion, the marshmallows aren't the best part. It's the cereal part.
I had somebody else. He loves Captain Crunch, and
Dude,
and he only likes the little tan colored like bits. He doesn't like
they're
the other
so
ones.
good. They're so good.
I don't think the marshmallows are that great. Honestly, like when I think of a marshmallow and I bite into one, I expect it to be fluffy, not like crunch in my mouth as I eat my cereal. No, thank you.
Yeah, it's like they're good, but the cereal part is honestly better. But Captain Crunch is like top five cereals.
Has Lucky Charms gotten like to the point where they have their cereal without the marshmallows yet?
I think there is some, but I think the best cereal ever. I think it's only at Walmart. It's Fruity Pebbles with the Lucky Charms marshmallows.
Ooh, that sounds good.
It's amazing.
And now I'm hungry again because I eat too much food in Corona teen. uh, well, cool. We're gonna go ahead here, and we've already given you guys the quiz question, at least in our post production of this episode. And I think we're just gonna spin off and go right into our segment one of just a random moment of random topics of randomness with your favorite random host Nathan and Cameron.
Oh yeah.
Let's jump into that. So Cameron, I know you had like some random questions that you had found of like what would you do type things.
Oh yeah. So there's I was looking up like just random questions to ask people, and they were more like icebreakers for like a conversation,
Mhm.
which I guess this is sort of accurate to that. It's like if you had to live one day that you've already lived, but every day for the rest of your life, what day would that be? I don't really know if I could choose one. I guess like one day when I was working at camp my first year, driving around with three of my friends going to Taco Bell on.
Mm,
So I think it was like the 4th of July, like 2018. I would probably relive that day.
that sounds fun.
It
Have you
was
having
lit.
Taco Bell every single day repeatedly though?
Oh, I would never get tired of it.
I feel like I'm living every single day as the same day of my life right now. I mean, at
Yeah.
least the time when we're recording this, Corona Teen is still ongoing, and I think it's been like 30 plus some odd days. It might be closer to 40 now. And I feel like every day is just the same day. I'm living a Monday every day. But if I had to like choose one day that I could just relive repeatedly, when I was like a teenager, the church I was going to took a trip to like this youth camp in Pensacola, Florida, and it was amazing. One, because it's Florida, and two, the camp had like everything. They had like this massive rock climbing wall and stuff like that. But if I could relive one day, it would probably be a day from that week or those days for camp because it was just a ton of fun.
Yeah, I love church camp. Especially like I know a lot of people love going there to be a camper. And the old camp I went to, it was really fun. But honestly, I think working there is much more fun, especially because you have more privileges and pranks are very common amongst the staff.
So without like picking one that would get you in a ton of trouble, if it got out, what's one prank that you have either pulled or have had pulled during that time at camp?
Oh, too many. One time I ran from the security guard Joe from like 11 p.m. until like 2 in the morning,
Oh my gosh.
and we, me and two other guys, planned with a bunch of other guys to put one of the kayaks on the roof of the main building,
Oh no.
but they never brought it to us because they got caught. So we ran to the river and hid by the rocks for like an hour
Oh my
and just
word.
just laid by the river. And then they flashed lights at us, but they didn't see us.
That's
So we
awesome.
so we got lucky. And then we ran. And they never technically caught us, but we admitted to doing it.
I don't know if I've ever really pulled. Okay, wait, no, never mind. I do have a prank that I pulled one time, and it will be of my top five. And it was so simple, but it was hilarious. I took a vacation with my family, and then we brought along my grandparents, so my grandma and my grandpa, and we went to Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, they had like this tour of some castle that's there. Beautiful property. But in the back of the property, there was like this trail that you could walk and it would go through the forest and stuff like that. And my grandpa kept like making fun of my grandma, saying, "Hey, you better be careful of the snakes." And she's like, "Oh, you better stop it. There aren't no snakes out here." And so we're crossing this little tiny bridge that was back in the back of the woods. And as we were walking over it, I reached down and I pinched the back of my grandma's like ankle. She screamed so loud and like fell on the floor flailing around, and me and my grandpa died laughing. It was the funniest thing. It was so simple, it was not complex, but just the fact that like the entire walk in the woods he was picking on her about this little snake that would bite her, and then that happening, it made the day. It was great.
Oh yeah, I have like a simple one. It's like it's sort of similar, but it was also at camp and it was in the putt putt shack. There was a few of us in there during I think it was like real camp. Like I was in 8th grade as a volunteer, and you know Gracie from our church.
Yeah.
So she like had hurt her ankle in like a couple of years before that,
Mm.
and then in paintball she hurt it again. So she was like sticking with me on crutches and stuff in the putt putt shack, and I made her think there was a spider in there because
Oh
she's
no.
scared of spiders, and I made her think it was on her head, and she screamed, and that wasn't even the funny part. She got me back, and it was horrible. She said there was a centipede by my feet, and I'm terrified of them. So I picked up a chair and I like threw it, and then I think that same day, Riley Berry and we were sitting on like this plastic beach chair, and he was sitting on it. and then he told me to sit on his lap, and I did, and then we broke the chair.
Oh no.
It was a good day. So
That's
I might have to
fantastic.
change my I might have to change it to reliving that day. It was pretty fun.
The day you broke a chair.
Yes, and many bug pranks.
Oh no. So if that, you know, with that being kind of like the day that you would relive, what is one day where you absolutely just would not want to happen, like and relive it?
Oh, every other day.
Every other day. I just don't want every other day. I feel that. I can agree to that. Definitely. I think times that I've been in Disney World, those days I would relive those. Back in the good old days when we could go.
I'd say I would never want to relive the day that Corona started.
Ugh. No, please. They're gonna put it in history books, and then I'm gonna feel real old because I'm gonna look at the page and be like, "Huh, I remember the time we didn't have toilet paper back in those days." You know, my kids are
Uh,
gonna ask me like, "Dad, do you remember the coronavirus?" And I'm gonna like start twitching, like, "Get the toilet paper, put it in the closet." Uh, Goodness.
my kids are gonna be like, "We're out of toilet paper," and I'll just have a panic attack.
We're out of what? Um, so what? I know that you had said like you might have had another question. Did you have another one as well?
Yeah. It said in the last like 50 years, what would you say is like the coolest or best invention? And I'd say definitely not the internet because
Mm.
although it's convenient, it's so toxic, and also it is brought way to robots. And the Terminator's coming. Let's go.
Uh, I think my favorite invention would be like 4K or high definition things
Oh yes.
because I like went back and started binge watching shows on like Disney Plus that I hadn't watched in years. And I had started watching like That's So Raven or Sweet Life of Zach and Cody and then Sweet Life on Deck. And the thing is all of those shows in like early 90s or 2000s or whatever didn't have high definition. And oh my word, you can tell. I don't know how I was watching TV like that. And the weird thing is like in the Sweet Life on Deck, there's like the first season, which I don't think was HD. And then right at the first episode of season two, like it would look like you jumped in the future because all of a sudden everything's HD. It's beautiful looking. And I'm like, what happened?
Yeah, that's why I can't stand watching older movies because people are like, the movie's a classic, you're gonna love it, but I'm like, it was filmed with a brick. Like, it's so bad.
It's ugly. I don't like it. No, I think that would probably be my favorite out of the ones that I guess like in the last 50 years. But like I like my phone and stuff like that, but I don't know. There's just something about beautiful looking imagery.
Yeah, recently, I think it was like Christmas this year, I bought a 4K TV. Uh, Me and my
So
brother
worth it.
have one in our room. Oh, ooh, dude, it looks nice.
Uh-huh. I want to get another one for my office, but and the nice thing is they're also kind of going down in price now too.
Oh yeah, this one was like $300.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, it was good, and ooh, it's nice. I think it's like 40 something inches, and pretty much all we do on there is like play Minecraft. That's all we do. And I guess like another question I saw, it was like, what is the funniest thing you watch? But I'm going to change it because of the Tiger King. Is like, what's the weirdest thing you've ever found yourself watching? I think for me it was so that Ted Bundy movie they have with Zac Efron. But
That's a weird
before
movie.
before that, like a few months, they released like a 4-part series. Each episode's like an hour and a half long, 2 hours of the Ted Bundy tapes, where
Yes.
it's like the documentary. So it's like 4 hour and a half episodes, and I binge watched them all in one day. And not gonna lie, I enjoyed it.
They're something.
It was interesting.
And like the guy was weird.
Oh yeah, it's like, but I couldn't help myself like wondering because he's so like formal and has manners. I'm like every time he would talk, I was like, did he really do it? And then I felt like weird. It's like he's very good at convincing you that he didn't do it. Like,
Yeah.
he definitely did.
Yeah. So I went to Tennessee with a friend of mine, and while we were down there, we didn't have any major plans. We just like got down there with the only plan of going to go see Spider Man in theaters. Yeah, we drove to Tennessee to go see Spider Man,
Which
but
one?
it was far from home. But they had a theater out there with moving seats, and they had wind and rain in the theater. It was awesome, worth it. But one of the things we did while we were out there is we went to a crime museum, and walked through this entire crime museum. We get to the end of this crime museum, and they have like a bunch of cars, and it was like replica car of O.J. Simpson chase or whatever. And you're going through, and it's a bunch of like replicas, and then you get down to the end, and it goes Ted Bundy's Volkswagen,
Oh
and
yeah,
I'm
the
like,
yellow
oh, I
Volkswagen.
looked at my friend. I'm like, look at this replica Volkswagen. And we looked at the plaque. Nope, it was the Volkswagen.
I forget,
So,
it was like yellow or brown or something, and it's like there weren't many made,
oh,
and people were like they described it perfectly, and then they saw him drive by, and they didn't pull him over,
it was
and then
weird.
yeah, it is a weird time, and like I don't know what it is. I have some weird fascination with like the mind of a serial killer, so I watch like all those shows. And have you ever seen like BuzzFeed, like the true crime videos,
Yes.
like BuzzFeed Unsolved? They're so good. Some of
No.
them I haven't watched just because like they sound weird. Like the disappearance of this child, I was like, I don't think I want to watch that.
Yeah, no. They needed an entire series on the crimes that were performed in Florida. I
Oh
feel like
yeah,
I'd watch that in a heartbeat. Like that could be its own show.
yeah. I think they just started season 6. I'm like, this whole season should be about Florida,
Yep.
and you still wouldn't even get a fraction of it.
All right. Well, I think this is a good point to kind of like pivot into our segment two. So we're going to take a quick break here, real fast, and then we will get into our segment two. Hello. Welcome back. We're going to go ahead and jump into our segment two here. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty as we recorded the microphone just started to like limp down, and I was like having to follow it as it fell. But we're good now. We're all back. Happy times. But jumping into our segment two here, rather than kind of tie it into a specific Wednesday lesson from like a recent week, we thought to do something a little more general. So, a new series that we've been working on is a series called Beyond the Auditorium, where we take a look at somebody within the audience or at our church who's either a member or somebody that's involved, and we just take a look and see what they're like outside of just working at the church. So for this particular episode, we thought it would be kind of cool to go ahead and take a look at who God is. Who is God beyond the church doors, like beyond the auditorium? So outside of what we just normally do, who really is the God that we serve? So a quick summary here, real fast, before we kind of go in and jump into this. Our summary for this is just throughout time, God has always desired to have a personal relationship with you and I. While his methods of building a relationship with us have changed over the course of time, God has not changed, and neither has his love towards us. To understand how God has not changed, we have to first understand who God is. We have to go beyond the auditorium with God. So, where we kind of started working on this topic, Nick Warren uh, went ahead and gave like a lesson on this topic, and we were going through like Exodus chapter 34 verses, like basically the whole chapter, but the verses we kind of wanted to focus on were on 6 and 7, where God actually describes himself. He like gives a list of his characteristics or qualities, and he says that he's merciful, gracious, long suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, keeper of mercy, and that he's forgiving. So it's kind of a cool explanation of like what are the characteristics of God. If you don't know or you haven't heard those verses or you've never seen them before, again, those are Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 through 7. Highly recommend checking those out. Um, Going through this topic, a couple things where I was trying to ask myself are like, what points, I guess, in life, um, or at what points in your life has God shown you like these aspects about himself? So these characteristics, have you had like an experience where you've actually seen these?
Oh yeah, so definitely, especially like merciful and gracious and forgiving, because as we all know, we are all sinners, and I can vouch for myself. I have messed up quite a bit, and I'd say that he's been very forgiving and given me opportunities to like show people that I've improved myself with like things in the church, this podcast, and like working at camp. It's just like I've been able to prove that God has forgiven me, and you don't have to like live in your sin forever,
Sure.
which some people may think is like impossible to get out of.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, and myself included, you get to a point where you feel like you're so trapped or you're so stuck in whatever you're involved in that you can't get out of it, or that you can't be forgiven or don't deserve that forgiveness. And I think in a lot of ways that's somewhat true. Like, you don't deserve forgiveness. I didn't deserve forgiveness in those times. But I think one of the characteristics that God shows and a characteristic of God is that even though, yes, we don't deserve it, he's still willing to forgive us for it. I think that comes from that mercy and that graciousness too. I can tell you right now, I know he's long suffering because, with all the times that I have just completely screwed up repeatedly, there is no reason why he should be patient with me anymore.
Yeah, it's like I'm sometimes a fairly patient person with like other people that make me mad, but like personally, I, I get kind of tired of it. So I imagine that him with like 7+ billion people, I don't understand how he's that patient with everybody because I get annoyed by like one person.
Right. And you had mentioned that like one thing that's really cool is that even regardless of the times that you've made mistakes or whatever the case is, that God is still willing to use you. Like you had mentioned camp or with this podcast. I think it kind of goes to show how gracious God really is. And until somebody experiences that for themselves, I think it's kind of hard to have any kind of, I guess, I don't want to say faith, but maybe belief that something can change. But I can at least say from my experience, and I'm sure you've had like a similar one, where it wasn't like God had just written you off. Like you made too many mistakes or whatever the case is. Now I'm not giving you anything else and you're not usable anymore. I think the fact that God is forgiving and is gracious, merciful, that he's still willing to give you opportunities to do things, which is kind of mind blowing because people in the world aren't going to do that.
Yeah, and I forgot the exact quote, but it's like God doesn't like use like the perfect people. He uses the imperfect people because why would he spend his time going after people that are like already saved and doing what they're supposed to if he could be going after people that are, completely messed up? It's
Sure.
like, yeah, I forgot the exact quote. I'll have to look it up, but it definitely makes sense. Like, why people are like, why would he focus on me? I'm messed up. That means he's going to focus on you more
Yeah.
because you're not okay without him. So you kind of need him.
I think that goes back to that, was it that story or that parable, where you have like a flock of sheep, like 100 sheep or something like that, and like one sheep goes and leaves, and the shepherd actually goes and chases down like that one sheep, because it's lost. And to your point, if 99 sheep are where they're supposed to be, you don't need to worry about the 99 sheep that are already there. But if you've got somebody who's going a different direction, who is essentially in danger or something that's valued, you're going to go after that one to pull them back. And I think that that's kind of what God does too. It's, you know, here's my set of people who are already serving and are in a good place, that 99. But yeah, let me take the time out of, that love and that mercy of going after the one that needs help getting back.
Yeah, and it's like I found the exact Bible verse. It's like Luke chapter 5 verse 32, where it's like, I came not to call the righteous but sinners to repentance. And like what you said about like the 99 and his love, I think it's like really showed in that song "Reckless Love," which a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people had a problem with because it says reckless. And I think Jared explained it to Brad, or it was the other way around, that it's like when they're saying reckless love, they're not saying God is reckless, or saying it's like being madly in love, like he's, you know, really going for you. He's not like, I like it, but
Sure.
it, yeah,
I think the one thing, whenever I've heard that term reckless love, is if you take, I think it adds more of a realistic look, a comparative look at God's love towards us. If you were to take a look at how much God loves us in comparison to the love that we show as people to one another, I think that people would look at it as being, quote unquote, in comparison to our standards, reckless. If I had the amount of love and dedication that God has at trying to get somebody back, to help somebody, I think the choices, if we were to compare it, seem reckless in our eyes because, oh my gosh, that's like above and beyond. How crazy. Um, that's the kind of God that we serve, though. This is a God who isn't going to meet the standards of what we call love. He's going to greatly exceed those expectations and standards. And so, in that way, I think if you compare it in that line, then yeah, in comparison to ours, it's not equivalent. It's not standard love. It is something that is actively trying to go after and help someone.
yeah, and it's like uh, it really confused me at first with like I was all for the song, and then I heard the argument of God's not reckless, and I was like, huh, it kind of makes sense. And then I got told about what it actually means, and like how you were saying, like he's just going after you. I think we obviously need to be more like that. We're like we say we love people, and like as Christians, you say I don't hate anybody, I love everybody, but
Sure.
then we don't go after them. So kind of
Yeah.
doesn't show it.
Right. I mean, I think we see that all the time. And I think a lot of Christians are guilty of that. I know I am. I won't necessarily speak for everybody, but I think as people in general, we have a habit of saying that we love somebody or that we care for people, but the second that they find themselves in a hard spot and they need help getting out of that, we are the exact people sometimes that turn our backs and say, "Well, I guess they'll have to figure it out on their own." Which in some cases is true. You can't fix everything for everyone all the time, but I think there needs to be a different mindset. I think we need to be more like Christ in the sense of, don't just write off the one because you got 99. Take some patience and some time to spend with those people who have drifted or are going a different direction.
Yeah, and I definitely believe that like how it said in Luke chapter 5 that like I have been told by Brad about this, like instead of just hanging out with your Christian friends, I think it's like good, contrary to what some older Christians say, like you shouldn't be hanging out with those type of people, but I think those are the exact people you should be hanging out with. You don't have to like let them influence how you act, but you should be hanging out with like all all the messed up people so you can actually help them, because if you're not hanging out with them and helping them, nobody's going to,
Sure.
especially if they haven't heard about it and they can't help themselves.
Yeah, I think it's important that Christians learn to balance the two. Because I think there are also verses in the Bible that talk about how bad manners will corrupt good morals or something like that. And I think that's true. You involve yourself or put yourself in a place where there's constant negativity or things that are not right or true, or I guess you could say morally strong. And eventually, you might be able to hold on to your morals for a period of time. But if you're constantly with that kind of influence, I do think that people will start to drift away a bit. But I also agree that, yeah, I think you have to be willing to not necessarily separate yourself from those people either, in the sense of like not being willing to talk and speak to them. How else are they going to hear about God if we are like, oh, no, I can't talk to you because you don't already believe what I believe. We've been
Yeah,
sent here to help people believe what is true, not to just expect that they're going to get it.
yeah. It's like rather than just keeping people away, you should chase after them. Obviously, like how God does. And some people may look at you like you're weird or being reckless, but obviously it's the right thing to do. And like I think I forgot where in the Bible it says it, but it's like how he is called out because he's eating dinner with like prostitutes and
Mm-hmm.
uh, thieves and stuff, and they're like, why are you with these sinners? They're not righteous." He's like, "I didn't come here for you. I came here for them."
Yeah. Savage answer, by the way. Just like,
Oh
sit
yeah,
down, eat
he's
your
like, "Sit
food.
down, son."
So I guess one thing in terms of when people talk about the characteristics of God, I get asked the question very often by both Christians and people who aren't saved, and I think it's never in a rude context, or usually isn't in a rude context, but in a way that's just a legitimate question. But the question I'm asked very often is, if God is loving, gracious, etc., why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? I don't know if you've ever been asked that question before.
All the time.
Yeah, and um, I think we as Christians can look at this question in one of two ways. We can look at it in that person of like, oh my goodness, how could they ask this or whatever, or be almost frustrated with the question. Or we can look at it and recognize it for what it is. It's a legitimate question. It's a good question. It's one that I think requires an answer. So to help, I guess, answer this question, I wanted to share a little bit of a story. We sent out kind of like a snippet or like a screenshot of our episode notes, and it just says Nathan's plunger on wall story with a little note that says "Sorry, mom." So when I was a kid, and my mom, I don't until very recently didn't know this story. I told her about it before this episode aired, and she was like, "That's what happened." But when I was a kid, I found like the plunger in the hallway by this one wall in my house. And I don't know why I did this. I was bored. But I took the plunger and I was like, do plungers really stick to walls? And so I took it and I like just went at it and just like plungered the wall, and then realized, oh crap, it does plunger on objects like in the movies. And so I was like, I gotta get it off. So I yanked the plunger away from the wall and consequently like ripped the paint and like the perfect circle plunger shape, and was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And my mom like comes walking into the hallway and she's like, what happened to the paint? And I'm like, it just chipped. It like started peeling. It's crazy. And until like very recently, for years, she thought the paint on her wall was just peeling so dramatically in this giant circle shape. It has since been painted over. We have fixed it. But yeah, that was me. This giant hole
With the plunger.
with a plunger. And, so part of the reason why I share that story, and I know it's kind of like goofy or whatever, but I guess a question that I could ask the people or to you is, was it the paint or the plunger's fault that the paint ripped off the wall?
No, it was your fault.
I don't know. I think it might have been the plunger. Stupid thing shouldn't stick to a wall. Like, silly manufacturers, don't you know that I'm going to put it on the walls? But yeah, it's not the plunger's fault that it ripped the paint off the wall, and it's not the paint's fault that it had a plunger on it getting pulled off the wall. It was my fault for putting the plunger on the wall to begin with. Um, So, with that in mind, I think the same thing applies to the question of if God is loving, gracious, etc., why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? I think the question, although a good question and a legitimate question, I think has to be changed a little bit because I don't think just like it wasn't the plunger's fault for having ripped the paint off the wall. It was my fault for using the item that was provided in the wrong way. Like it's supposed to be in the toilet, not necessarily on the wall. So I think the question has to be modified a little bit. And how I kind of changed the question, one that I think we can talk about in line with this conversation is why do bad people do bad things to good people? And why are more good people not doing things to prevent bad things from happening?
Yeah, so it's like I think it's it's hard to like paint with like a broad brush of like who's bad and who's good, but it's like I'd say like people do things to other people, and like people that are think they're good, or like why is this happening to me? I haven't done anything wrong,
Hmm.
but not everybody really cares, or maybe you did something that you don't know, or maybe somebody just feels like doing something to you. So it's not necessarily you could have really not done anything, and so you could be like the paint on the wall, and then that person takes a plunger and just rips you apart. Like not necessarily your fault, it's their fault, and the plunger is like God. So it's like you're the paint, God's the plunger. The other person is, Nathan. So
Oh, that
he
Nathan.
so it's other people's fault that they're like doing bad things to you, or it's like your not necessarily your specific fault, but humankind's fault because of sin
Sure.
that like bad things are happening. It's not God's fault. It's like sin that's happening. And yes, he like allows things to happen, but it's not like for no reason. He's not just like using a plunger on you just for laughs.
Yeah.
It's all for a reason. So it's like something bad might happen to you. Instead of like asking why'd that happen to me, like how can I react to it, and like where is it going to lead you to a different situation, and it could probably change like how you live your life. I know this one guy I saw at camp. He like I think he had like lost one of his legs,
Mm.
but he wanted to be a basketball player. So he had one of his legs was a prosthetic, and now he's a preacher. So it's like, yeah, it kind of sucked, but it led to a pretty cool place. So don't like question it right away. You can like look back on it when you get there, which is obviously easier said than done.
Sure. Yeah, I think part of that thing is identifying or remembering the fact that God's characteristics haven't changed. So he's still loving, he's still gracious, he's still kind. There are going to be things that happen in life that, yeah, can suck, but I think that it's still, regardless of those situations, God is still able to use those situations to make something fantastic out of them. And that requires a lot of faith. I think even as a Christian, that requires a lot of patience and faith and hope in the fact of you may not always see that good result right away. And 90% of the times you're not going to until much later in the future. But I think another way of looking at this idea too is, I tried to blame the plunger for the problem when I was the one that went ahead and made the problem in the first place. I misused what was created for a different purpose. I think that if we were to look at kind of the paint and the plunger as earth, I think it's the same thing. Where I think a lot of people forget is that, or maybe just don't know, God's earth was not created, or his original creation was not created with the intention to contain, I guess, what we could call bad things or sin. It was a perfect place. It was like I don't know, the Valhalla of like creation, just better. Where things got screwed up was because we as humans, we as God's creation decided, let's go ahead and do what we were told not to do anyways, and introduced a problem to Earth. We misused the thing that God had created for us and then are trying to blame the item that we misused as the reason for the problem. It would have been like me blaming the plunger for the plunger ripping the paint off the wall rather than looking at it as I misused the item that's intention was never to be put on a wall to begin with. So I think the one thing we have to keep in mind is God's creation was without sin before we as humans decided with, our God-given choice that it would be easier to just rebel and screw it up. And now we're facing the consequences and we're blaming God for it. We're blaming God who didn't necessarily make the problem to begin with because we misused the item.
Yeah, it's like I'll, people I hear often like ask like why does God do this stuff? It's like not necessarily him doing it, but it's like he's letting it happen. And obviously like with the situation of Job, he's like he let Satan do certain things, but he said like don't hurt him, but like you can take his stuff. So it's like he lets bad things happen in order to help you like grow as a Christian. And it's not the fact that he's doing anything because he's not like actively going out and like trying to destroy your life, but like he'll let Satan work and do things to a certain extent in order to get you moving, so you're not just sitting there doing nothing. Because sometimes it takes a little bit of a bad thing to make you get up off your butt and actually do something with your life.
Sure. Yeah, I think where we kind of I think misinterpret things too is that um, regardless of the person, God has never intended on controlling people. I think he has when he created creation, created with the idea of I want this thing that I'm building to have free thought, free reign to choose whether or not they love me or not. I think about this in like a parent, child type relationship. If you as a parent are forcing your child to love you or whatever the case is, that child isn't going to necessarily want to love that parent or whatever the case is. If anything, if they're forcibly having to be made to do something, they're going to rebel against it. And I think God understands that about his creation too. I don't think, wanted us to forcibly be made to not have a personal choice. He wanted us to have that free range to decide to grow a relationship with him or make the right decision. With that free choice also comes the fact that as much as people have a choice to do the right thing, everybody has a free choice to also do the wrong thing. And I think when somebody is, a tragedy happens or whatever the case is, we also have to remember the fact that that's also somebody's choice. Wrong choice, yes. Dark choice, absolutely. But if God just started controlling everybody and forcibly making people do what he wanted, we'd hate that. That wouldn't be very loving. Like, I wouldn't want to live like that.
Yeah, it's like what good is like love? It's just if it's just from a robot and they don't have a choice. Because like I'd say I'd rather want somebody to love me because they want to rather than me making them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I know like one question that I hear people ask about is like, uh, if God is omniscient and he knows everything before it's going to happen, why did he give us free will if he knew we were just going to sin? I'm like, because although he knew we were going to sin, he didn't want to like take that choice.
Mm.
And I think it's, I mean, one theory that I heard is like that although he knows like our hearts and like like what we're going to do, I think like the future is never like certain that we can like change what we're going to do based on our free will. I mean, I don't know. That's just a theory that I heard, but like, I think that to answer their question of like, if he knew we were just going to sin, why did he give us free will? Is like, because I mean, it's still our choice. Because like,
Sure.
I guess it's all about him. Like, he wants us to love him, and even if it requires us having pain and living in a sinful world, it's better than like having a bunch of robots love him.
Yeah, I mean, I think even even more so than that too is the fact that yeah, God is omniscient. He knows yesterday, today, tomorrow, future, whatever. The thing that I think shows just how loving and caring he is he handcrafted creation. So he handcrafted you and I, human beings. And if you think about it, he handcrafted us knowing we were going to betray him, knowing how much we're going to screw up and things like that, and yet still decided I love them enough to still create them. I think that's crazy. I think that kind of blows my mind. I think about it in the sense of like nowadays, if I was creating something knowing that that thing was going to screw up, I'd give up on it. It would never become a thing. But we serve a God that, even knowing how far away that we were going to run from him, decided that he still loved us enough to create us regardless of that. And the other side of that too is I think we also get mad at God because, oh well, then why am I even here? What's the point? And things like that. I think even regardless of the fact that he knew that we were going to screw up, also provided us a way out of that. He said, hey, you're going to mess up. It's not going to be great. You're going to run away from me. But here's Jesus Christ, who's going to die and sacrifice himself in your place because I love you enough to give you an opportunity to be able to come and spend time with me in what I intended your life to be. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's like our love towards him is even more valuable if it's like coming out of like being triumphant over bad things in your life. Because I mean, if you love him but you've had nothing happen to you and you've had a sinless life, I think it has less impact than like, oh, I went through all this bad stuff and then God saved me and that's why I love him, rather than, oh, I just love him because I was born like that. Like,
Sure.
I think it just has more impact and meaning to it.
Yeah. So, kind of wrapping up here before we kind of give the trivia question for this one. To add kind of, I guess, like a personal context to this, because I know it's a big topic, and for a lot of people, it can be kind of confusing at times. But where has there been a time in your life where you've like blamed or been mad at God for problems that you later found out were pretty much due to your own choices and actions?
Oh yeah, and like, yeah, that's a really good question, and I know it's a problem with a lot of people, and I try not to be like this, but I mean, I don't think anybody can say that they've never thought it at least once.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to like think of a specific example, but I think like back like 2 years ago or so, 3 years ago, uh, my first grandparent that died,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, God, why'd you do that? That really sucked.
Right.
Like, you didn't have to go off and kill my grandfather, because like I was already not doing too good, and then that happened, and I was like, come on, God, that was not cool, dude.
Sure.
And then I got kind of distant. But I'd say besides like that, I try not to be like blame God, because although I am messed up, I'm very self aware, I guess, and I blame myself for pretty much everything. But like, I definitely have blamed God for like a lot of death and like bad things that have happened.
Mm-hmm.
But like, why'd you let that happen? But then I just look back on it and like, well, it has changed me and my family's life and how we act, and it's brought us closer together. So I guess like, and that grandpa actually got saved right before he died. So I mean, like, it was for a good reason.
Sure.
It wasn't just like, oh, I want to kill your grandfather.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't think God ever has any kind of malicious intent with the things that happen too. And I think some things are just they kind of are what they are. They're like the circle of life, I guess. Like
Yeah.
you live, you die. Kind of tragic, I think, for some people, but I think that's the case. I wish I could say the same thing, that like I haven't blamed God, I guess, or been mad at God in my life, but I don't think I would be able to honestly say that. I think there was definitely a time in life where I had a lot of friends and there was a lot of people around. And at some point, God had allowed those people to kind of leave my life or not be there anymore. And in that time period, I blamed God and was extremely upset because I felt like life just was not going the right way. I look back at it now, though, and some of those people who left, I think left because of my choices and the way that I was acting at that time. Like, I was very impatient. I was not doing really what I knew I was supposed to. I wasn't living a godly lifestyle. And I kind of look back and I'm like, well, I can't blame God for the fact that I was deciding to do things that ultimately resulted in losing some people. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with is looking at the problems that they have in life and not necessarily just blaming God for it, but looking and seeing, am I causing these issues to myself? Same thing with that plunger idea. Is it actually God allowing these things, or am because of my misuse of whatever has been placed there, am I blaming something that wasn't even the problem to begin with when I was the problem or I made a mistake? And that requires that humility and so yeah, I've definitely been in a lot of places in life where I think I was mad or blamed God that nowadays I try not to be.
Yeah, before we get to the trivia question, I think it's like you really have to like look back and just like take responsibility for like the things that you've done. So it's like I remember a couple of years ago, I was like really close to this person that I met at camp, and I had made a really stupid decision, and like I acted really weird, and then they stopped talking to me, and now we don't talk at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, God, why'd you take that person from me? Like I really cared about them, and then I didn't realize it until like a year later. I was like, oh wait, I acted like that. That's probably why they left. So it's like you really just got to take responsibility. Obviously, not everything's like in your control, and it's not just because of you, but I'd say most of the time it's because of our decisions. So it's like
Sure.
you got to be like you got to humble yourself sometimes,
Sure.
not just blame everything on God, because that's not going to even get you anywhere.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that we'll kind of wrap up that section here and kind of head into our segment 3, our trivia question.
Yes, trivia.
Oh,
This one's
trivia.
good.
I like this one a lot. I can't wait to get the answer for this one. Um, so we talked a lot about plungers and overall plumbing items in this episode. So we wanted kind of like a fitting trivia question. Cameron, do you want to give us our trivia question?
Oh yes, it was good. So I was trying to find one for a plunger, but this is even better. Uh, so the word plumber, as in the occupation, it comes from the Latin word that is for lead. So because lead was like what we made pipes out of before we used PVC, that's why the Latin word for lead was used in inspiration for the word plumber. What is that Latin word for lead? It is so funny, and I think it should have been the name for a plunger.
I was just gonna say the same thing. Like, I think the Latin word, we shouldn't have changed it.
If they named if they named a plunger this, it would I would probably carry one around and just hit people with it, like take my.
I think I'm gonna actively call plumbers by their Latin root name for
Yeah,
lead.
I think I'm gonna call it that forever. And people are like, I'm gonna say, hand me that, and they're gonna be like, what?
Oh my goodness, it's gonna be great. So yeah, what is the Latin word for lead, which is then corresponds to the word plumber? So good luck, have fun, and we'll give you that answer later on because it's just fun to say. All right. Well, until next time, remember to be different, do different.